The story of how I was too dumb to run. I was 21 and freshly out of an abusive relationship with my high school sweetheart. I moved from State 1 back to State 2 to be with my family, lick my wounds, and try to turn my life around. I had just started university and had a part-time job at a place I loathed, but worked with my college schedule. I met a guy at work who was also in school, and we hit it off. We were just two peas in a pod. Young, in lust, dumb, and hopeful. I shared some of my abusive past with him, and he claimed to understand and be supportive of my hesitations. I never thought to tell him that what I shared was just between me and him. This guy would eventually turn into ex-dear husband. One day, at work in the break room, the subject of spousal R came about. Not a clue now as to how or why, but I shared a tiny bit of my abusive past. I went toe-to-toe with some older a-hole because he believed there is no R in a marriage. He believed it was sinful to not submit. He wasn't my favorite person. The conversation eventually changed and life at work carried on. That evening, as future dear ex-husband walked me to the car, he asked why I had told his dad, future ex-father-in-law, I had been R. Of course, I had no idea what he was talking about. But I immediately found out his dad worked there as well, and as luck would have it, his dad was the older a-hole I had the audacity to disagree with while using my lady brain. He then told me that his mom, future ex-mother-in-law, had called him, and in a fit of hysterics caused by future ex-father-in-law's news about the girl future ex-dear husband was dating, she was insisting on meeting me to discuss things. I was floored and not at all ready to meet his parents. But I agreed to the meeting because I didn't know what else to do. Y'all, I was dumb. A couple weeks later, and it's time to officially meet the parents. I had no idea what I was in for, but I was hopeful that his family would be lovely, and they would love me, because at this point, I was having some feelings for their son. In my family, you respect the person your loved one loves. Your personal feelings aren't important. I thought that's how everyone was. Y'all, I was so dumb. No sooner had he led me in the front door did his mother look me up and down and state, "She's fat." I wish I was as fat now as I was then. I was 5 foot 4 inches and 130 pounds. Then she starts with hysterics, wailing about how I was fat and impure. How I had allowed myself to be defiled and was unworthy of love. Future ex-dear husband leaves me standing there, jaw on the floor, as he rushes to his mother's side to catch her as she fakes becoming faint. She continues wailing and makes hand motions at a bottle of pills conveniently on the dining room table, to which he opens and hands her one. I didn't move a muscle. Perhaps it was primal instinct kicking in, but I'm pretty sure I thought if I moved, I'd give away my position and the hellhounds would descend. They did anyway. I stood there, slack-jawed, trying to take in the scene before me. I had never before and have never again, outside this woman, witnessed anything of the sort. Ex-father-in-law takes over the fanning of ex-mother-in-law, and ex-dear husband comes over to me and whispers, "Sometimes mom isn't well." It was then I noticed ex-sister-in-law, a junior in high school, watching, wide-eyed, and looking like she just wanted to disappear. If she could have, she would have melted into that chair. Ex-dear husband is trying his best to make excuses for his mother. Sometimes she isn't well. He's never brought anyone home before. He's the baby boy. She's never known anyone R. Her Christian beliefs don't allow for any S before marriage, etc., etc., etc. I should have left, but I already told y'all, I was dumb. Soon enough, ex-mother-in-law was calm. And by calm, I mean she was only crying at a level to be expected of someone who had just found out their husband of 50 years had died. So things were definitely better. I was shell-shocked and hadn't even heard the knock at the door. I only noticed that 2 new people were being ushered in the front door. I was then introduced to Pastor and Pastor's wife. Pastor sat across from me in the living room while Pastor's wife went to console ex-mother-in-law. I couldn't tell you what Pastor was saying to me, but I heard ex-mother-in-law tell Pastor's wife that I had walked in their home and immediately told her that I was going to duck her son all day, every day, and there isn't a thing you can do about it. I lost my stuff. I called her a filthy liar and a manipulative see you next Tuesday. Not my proudest moment, but it's up there. You would have thought this would have been my cue to leave, but you, my friends, are so very wrong. Pastor and pastor's wife calmed everyone down and insisted that we talk things through. I couldn't imagine what needed to be talked through, but I agreed. And it's here that we hit the apex of the night. What could possibly make any of this any more unbelievable? I'd wait for you to guess, but since this is a wall of text online, it's probably unfair to wait. So I'll just tell you. They called in the brothers-in-law and their wives to join the conversation from their country. And still I sat there, like a dumb country bumpkin. I was asked to recount the abuses of my ex's hands so they could be judged by the pastor and the family. They were prepared with a list of my abuses provided by ex-dear husband from our private conversations. They had the list so they would know if I was lying. What? Ex-brother-in-law 2 was cruel and brutal. Ex-sister-in-law 2 was mostly silent. Ex-brother-in-law 1 and his wife were livid about what was happening to me and refused to take part. Ex-sister-in-law was scared to death. At one point, ex-sister-in-law 2 asked to speak, and she said, "Mama, no. These people are vile and unforgivable for what they're doing to you. It doesn't get any better. Run, now." Ex-brother-in-law 2 started yelling at her, and I'm assuming they disconnected on their end. All told, it was about 3 hours long. It was finally ruled that I was not at fault for my R and beatings at the hand of my ex by the pastor. The family agreed to abide by his wisdom and not allow these transgressions to taint their view and treatment of me. They all promised to be vessels of the Lord and treat me with kindness and compassion from then on. Ducking liars, the lot. As I was finally leaving, I was encouraged to embrace these people. Ex-mother-in-law whispered in my ear, "You'll always be a whore, and I'll condemn myself to hell before I let anyone think you are anything but a filthy whore." I accidentally crushed her toes with my heel when I broke away and went to hug ex-father-in-law. She swore I did it on purpose. I did. However, 2 can play her game, and I was pretty convincing in my tearful apology for the accident. Her CB face could have been seen from orbit when Pastor told her to calm down, that it was the emotion from the night making her injury seem worse than it was. She wore a boot on her foot for 2 months afterward and loved to tell people how she was stepped on by a heifer. When inevitably asked what she was doing around cattle, she would smirk and say it wasn't cattle really, just her baby boy's fat girlfriend. Walking to the car, ex-dear husband was so happy with the end results that he was practically giddy that we had the family blessing to date one another. And date we did, because I was so ducking dumb, y'all. Looking back, I now realize that I was in shock, and I can proudly say that there was never a moment where I stood for their abuse again. It was this one and only time. There was plenty of abuse to be had, but never again did I stand by and silently allow it. In fact, pissing off his family quickly became one of my favorite things to do, and it still is to this day. Last we spoke, if you'll recall, I was introducing my vile ex-mother-in-law from hell. If you don't remember, Bebot does. And if Bebot is on siesta, then this account is solely for just no mother-in-law, and the starter story is easy to find. Now, future at the time, ex-dear husband was pleased as punch that we had the family blessing to date. After the shock wore off, I was pissed as hell about what happened. I refused to date him, and for a couple weeks I held my resolve. But as we've established, I was dumb. So naturally, I let him sweet-talk me. We started dating seriously about 3 weeks after the events of my last post, and at that point, we were about a total of 4 months into our relationship. Naturally, our first official date would be to church with his family. Boy, was I excited. Sunday rolls around, and my mom and I have giggle fits about having me show up in thigh-high boots and a skin-tight club dress. But since I didn't own any of that, I went with a newly reformed whore classic, a standard long sundress. It was very modest, and I felt good. As I'm leaving, Dad makes a point of admonishing me for not wearing enough whore makeup, and I'm on my way. I truly love my parents. We get to the church, and ex-mother-in-law is waiting outside to take us in. She takes one look at me and declares that I look like a 10-pound sausage in a 5-pound casing. She also got in a jab about how women of ill repute should dress more conservatively when visiting the house of our Lord. I replied with something along the lines of how I was always told that imitation was a sincere form of flattery, and I was only trying to follow her fashion lead for her church, and that I would be less whorish next time so as to not upstage her again. CB face for days. Ex-dear husband was too dumb to catch what had just happened. Services were fine. I wasn't even bothered at pastor's pointed message about loving and accepting everyone. Yes, even those of questionable background and girls quick to lie with men. Yeah, they knew I was coming. It was a big deal, y'all. Ex-father-in-law was pretty disappointed God didn't immediately smite me the moment I walked through the church doors. So, service was fine. It was the luncheon afterward that was fun. Most folks were kind and welcoming. But that's not what makes this good llama feed. It's the 20 or so church ladies gather around ex-mother-in-law whispering and pointing in my direction that makes good llama feed. If looks could kill, y'all, these ladies would have dropped me where I stood. Future ex-father-in-law would have got his wish for sure. Being the brazen hussy I was, I walked right up to them, turned on my southern-bred charm, and introduced myself. I tell you, we were all just the best of friends all lunch long. We talked and we laughed. We shared stories, and I was just such a pleasure. Kill them with kindness. They loved me. Just kidding. They hated me. Of course, they wouldn't dare drop the politeness and risk shame on their family names by treating me like the garbage they believed me to be. Ex-mother-in-law CB-faced the whole time because there wasn't anything she could do, and I enjoyed the hell out of getting all up in her group and cramping her style. However, at one point she did seize a natural pause in conversation to ask me just how many men I'd slept with before seducing her son. I told her that I surely hadn't outdone her yet, and that I was certain she was still number one in the hussy department. This was met with a round of pearl clutching and many "well, I nevers." I love bitter church ladies. Naturally, I gave my number and email to a few ladies and definitely to some of the younger ladies in attendance. I was hell-bent on making myself at home just to spite the ex-in-laws. Here is where it gets good, and it took me more than a couple weeks to accomplish. But if you take nothing else from an abusive long-term relationship, you can always take the ability to patiently bide your time and make a move when necessary. I made sure to attend as many of the events and outings the young church ladies had planned, and they all knew me by my proper Southern given name. Not a single one of the gals knew me as Mama No. Now, as far as I know, all churches have a phone tree, email tree. More importantly, there is an unofficial gossip phone, email tree. It took a few weeks of always being interested in someone's juicy gossip, and eventually I was added to the gossip tree, likely by mistake. As I was listed by my given name, ex-mother-in-law, who couldn't be bothered to learn my actual name, had no idea that I was added to the list. This is exactly what I wanted, and I quietly received emails down the gossip line. I got to read all sorts of saucy gossip and the torrid details about our congregation. It was over a year of reply all gossip on an original email titled, "The Unofficial Happenings at Church Name." Shh, it's our secret. No, that crap right there is exactly what it was titled. Y'all, it was months and months of trash, and it was glorious. But as much as I was loving reading this garbage, I was starting to wonder if this long con was going to pay off. Yes, I had her past nonsense talk about me in all of the reply all mess of a gossip email, but I wanted something fresh and new. I wanted something that couldn't be dismissed as that was past ex-mother-in-law. She's turning over a new leaf. As I waited for her to make her move, she escalated around town. It was no secret that God and I were on unsteady ground at the time. I had just escaped hell, only to find fresh hell with these people. God and I weren't besties. I was angry. So, ex-mother-in-law, in all of her infinite wisdom, decided to tell everyone that would listen that I had renounced God. No, I hadn't. And that I was a devil worshipper atheist. That doesn't even make sense. She went so far as to carry my picture on her to show the cashier at the Publix and the oil change guy. I love Publix. Now, it didn't take a hot minute for word to get back to me and my family in our moderately sized town. People knew me and my family, They weren't having it, but we decided to turn the other cheek and ignore her. Does she decide to crawl back into whatever hole she crawled out of? No, she doubles down. She pays damn good money to have my face photoshopped onto a picture of a stripper and onto a picture of a witch sacrificing a goat. I can't make this up. It wasn't even a good Photoshop. It was 2002 Photoshop, and it was the same ducking head on both pictures. People literally laughed in her face. I'd like to say she slowed her roll, but we all know she didn't. She started producing fake ultrasounds of a baby I was carrying to trap her son. But since I was a whore, there was no telling who the baby daddy was. She even went so far as to buy some baby things to have on hand for nosy church ladies to ask about. Just as it was getting to the point where I couldn't turn the other cheek and keep playing sweet church girl, I started to call myself crazy and convince myself ex-mother-in-law wasn't dumb enough to put her bullshit in writing. Then it happened. One beautiful morning, I woke up to an email from the gossip tree. Ex-mother-in-law detailed all of her baby boy's whore girlfriend's transgressions. That's me, wink. She detailed my repeated offenses of allowing myself to be R, my outfits for the last week, where I was going and who I was with, lies about me prostituting myself to pay for college, how many times she suspected I had seduced her confused baby. Girl, why are you trying to count how many times you think your son got in it for the past week? Trash-talking my mama. Girl, bye. Saying I had fallen pregnant and tried to trap her baby. Claims I aborted this fictional child. Twice. 2 abortions in a week. I strive for excellence in all I do, so 1 abortion wasn't enough. Plus a bunch of other crap. Also, we weren't having S. I was brutalized by my ex and had 0 interest in S at the time. They knew this because of the family meeting. The email was heartbreaking, but it was also the ammo I needed. I immediately typed an email to share with the masses and then forwarded the email to the pastor, the deacons, and the entire congregation. See, church was life for this bee. She loved her church, so I was going to fix her wagon, and 7 weeks of patience had paid off. Not only did I forward this new bit of nasty gossip about me, but I forwarded everything I had received up to that point, which I'm pretty sure was almost all of it. Mimsy bitching about her daughter-in-law? Forwarded. Betsy trash-talking the pastor's wife? Forwarded. Lucy spilling family secret about Marge's family? Forwarded. Deacon's wife disclosing confidential counseling information? Forwarded. I put it all out there to the 250-plus member congregation, exposing ex-mother-in-law and those harpies for who they were. I dug out the email just for y'all, so here's what I wrote, verbatim, in all of its no coffee yet, self-righteous, just-turned 22-year-old pompous wisdom. Dearest members of our church family, I feel that I cannot continue my relationship with our church without first addressing some nasty business I have become aware of. I feel it is in the best interest of us all to know what is happening underneath the godly facade we show the world. There is, and I suspect has been for quite some time, a gossip email chain passed amongst over 60 of our members that serves only to defame and belittle other members of the congregation. I will let the email forward I'm sending you now speak for itself, as my additional commentary isn't necessary. Please note, the only changes I've made to the forward is to put asterisks in place of all names I could catch that had very private information discussed. I've left the names of the gossips as they are. Everyone mentioned in this forward should be able to see what applies to them. However, I will be forwarding an unaltered version to Pastor if anyone doubts the validity of what you are seeing and would like verification. Please note, I bring this to light out of love for our church, and I feel that if we address this wickedness, those that should might ask for forgiveness and be forgiven. I have so much hope for making this church my home and want to move forward as the loving church family we believe ourselves to be. Sincerely given name, aka Mama No. P.S. In regard to the nasty and untrue things said about me by ex-mother-in-law, I want her and her family to know that I harbor no ill will and I am ready to forgive. After all, she was a promiscuous young woman once who slept with many men in a short period of time. Her oldest child, ex-brother-in-law 1, was born out of wedlock, and to this day she cannot name his true father. Although I don't understand why, I do understand that she is projecting her shame, and she truly does not wish for you all to think of me the way that she was once thought of before moving to the US and starting a new life. And just like that, I blew ex-mother-in-law out of the water, and her church was chaos for months. And years later, they still just aren't the same. I lit a match and I roasted marshmallows over the flames. Ex-mother-in-law hemmed and hawed about slander and suing me, but she never moved beyond that. Her name and reputation were ruined, and she and the other harpies became known as nasty gossips all over the church circuit. Part of me almost felt bad for the younger gals, but they had made their beds. I was a little sad that this meant I would never have a relationship with this woman, but mostly I was okay with that. After I sent the email, I had the thought to call ex-brother-in-law 1 and let him know what I had done, as I did it without his permission, and I felt terribly guilty for selfishly throwing him under the bus. Thankfully, he thought it was hilarious and justified. He said he had no shame about his origins, and since he'd lived in home country for nearly 20 years away from his family, he had no worries. Being the super-duper adult I am now, and with all the cliches about hindsight I could possibly toss in, I see how I probably shouldn't have aired her dirty laundry to the whole congregation. Maybe 37-year-old me would do it differently. Or maybe that bee got what she deserved. Who knows? Probably not my proudest moment, but it's right up there in the top 20. Edit 1. Church fallout. I'm mostly copying what I put in a comment and added a little to that. Pastor, being the man of God he was and a dutiful shepherd to his flock, pretty much tucked tail and run. He stayed through a couple more Sundays trying to put out the fires and smooth out ruffled feathers, but the damage was done and it was far-reaching. He fired, do you fire deacons? His deacons with blabbering wives and tried to replace church leaders, but no one trusted anyone anymore, so that went over like a fart in church. Finally, it was decided that there would be a vote on the new leaders and deacons, but that was its own special kind of crap storm. Before a month had passed, he retired, citing family priorities. The church eventually received a new pastor, and another. Pastor number 4 has been there for about 5 years now, and seems to be putting the pieces back together and building a new congregation. I hadn't intended to topple that church altogether, and I honestly don't think I did. I think they set themselves up, and I had the balls to light the match. I get that pastor couldn't control his congregation. He's not responsible for what his people eventually do, but he was responsible for providing a good message and leading by example. When he decided that he was judge and jury over my past and how I would be treated in the future, I decided he didn't have a very good message. I ran into him a few months back when I was back home visiting family. He wouldn't look me in the eyes. As for the congregation, they didn't fare well either. More than half left in shame, either for being outed as a gossip or because of sensitive information about them that was passed around by the gossips. Divorces, paternity, addictions, affairs, lost jobs, child abuse, you name it, it was in those emails and nothing was off limits. The more bawdy, the better. A majority of what was left turned on each other out of paranoia and/or power struggle for position in what was left of the church. Eventually, most of those left as well. What was left was about 50 tithing members, and they tried to rebuild. It's taken years, but it seems the new pastor is building something good now. How about those harpies? Well, they split into 2 groups, old and young, and tried to find new church homes. But even now, 15 years later, they are still known for what they did and find it hard to fit in. I really like knowing this. Edit 2. Inbox question that I think deserves an answer here. Did you mean to destroy the whole church? You obliterated a church out of spite for your ex-mother-in-law. Ouch. Yeah, I suppose I can see where you could get that, but there's a bit more to it. Sure, I wanted to kick my ex-mother-in-law's ass, and I definitely wanted to give her a taste of her own medicine, especially after I had started my long con, and she was about town with her nonsense. That business just solidified my resolve. Maybe I can walk you through my thought process. I grew up in Southern churches, and I know what the ladies can be like. I know there are gossip chains and a hierarchy. I knew how important ex-mother-in-law's church was, and more importantly, she gave me a big clue on how to F with her one day when she went on and on about how important she and her harpies were. I was young and dumb, but I wasn't stupid. So of course I agreed to go to church, and I chose her church as my means to humiliate her. Knowing what I knew about church ladies, I knew I had to settle in for a long con. As for the pastor, I hated him and what he stood for after our little meeting. Again, church would be the best place to knock him down a peg. Now, for a church of 250 plus members, I absolutely underestimated 1. The church ladies' reach and numbers. 2. How many people would be affected by my plan if it worked. Once I was added to the gossip email, seriously, a good year or more of gossip, I knew I had been handed something to take the pastor down a peg: pride and image. Additionally, after the shock wore off about the number of church ladies I was dealing with, I was pissed about their viciousness and delusions of grandeur. Remember when I said I was starting to doubt ex-mother-in-law would say anything new in the email for me to use? Well, I had to set a time frame of 1 more week, and if she hadn't said anything new, I was going to out the biddies and take a swing at the pastor. I really wanted ex-mother-in-law to say something new so that I wouldn't appear to be attacking. I wanted what I had to say to appear in my defense and innocent, but if I didn't get what I wanted from her, I was still able to hurt her by taking out her harpies and making her favorite place an unsafe place for her and the bees. I hope I'm making sense. As for the obliteration of the church, meh, it's still there, just with a much smaller congregation. I'm sad for the people that left because of what was said about them. That truly sucks. But in the end, it's better to know.